Hi guys, welcome back.
What's my story? It's not about being famous on the internet.
We're live in Santa Barbara.
It's about everything I do.
Hey guys. My everyday routines take you through
My uniqueness.
My obsessions.
My successes and my struggles.
who I am can inspire others.
My friends all around the world.
Smells so good.
When sharing my experiences, I'm always inspired.
With lifelike colors and sharpness.
Whether it's day or night.
Always from my own unique angle.
I can show more.
I can get up close.
I can capture my best friend dramatically and larger than life.
Telling my story my way just comes naturally.
It's just me and my followers, always with me, every step of the way, over to the other side.
As I grow, I can express myself in new ways, with amazing details and textures.
With real emotions.
In a unique look that makes me more creative.
Whether it's a small crew of followers or millions of friends worldwide, their reactions and support feed my creativity.
There are so many who inspire me, and I just want to do the same for them.
So refreshing.
I'm just starting. Watch me grow. We are on top of the world.
Nikon Z30. Be inspired, inspire others.
Hi everyone, my name is Taku Kumabe. Thank you for joining me today. I'd like to thank Nikon Canada for giving me this opportunity to share with you my passion for photography. Today's topic I'll be talking about is urban wildlife photography. And what I mean by urban for the purpose of this presentation, I'll be talking about settings in nearby urban locations. So not necessarily wildlife that's located in city centers and whatnot, but wildlife located at parks not too far away from these cities that we live in. All these places that are accessible by the general public, and any wildlife that I can find. So generally speaking, anything that I find whenever I go traveling. So in this case, it's a snowy owl that you see in the picture there, but I've captured birds and other animals as well that you see in your local parks, and I hope to share with you those findings for this presentation. Before we go further, a little bit about myself. I am a freelance photographer here in Toronto, Canada. And I do a lot of events, which allows me to do many things like food photography, concert photography. I do family portraits as well as businesses or editorial portraits as well. And if you are following me on Instagram, I do a lot of Toronto, portraits or landscapes and sunrise photography there as well. So thank you so much for those of you who are following me there. So going forward, we talk about storytelling imagery. And when I say storytelling imagery, I mainly refer to three different types of perspectives that we can use in terms of, in order to tell stories with our images. These three perspectives, the first one, number one, is a detailed perspective. So if you can see on the bottom left-hand corner of this barn swallow here, the detail basically allows us to get really close up to our subject matter so we can see the finer details of the subject. In this case, it's a little bird, so you'll be able to capture the details of the feathers, the bird's beak, or the eyes, and whatnot. The second perspective I refer to is the middle ground, which is a little bit wider capture of the scene in front of you. So you have your subject matter, if it's this bird in this case. The bird is captured in its entirety, and you have a little bit of its habitat or its environment shown so that you get an idea of the context of where this bird is photographed in. And finally, the third perspective is environmental settings. So we have a larger, wide open view of the photo or of the scene in front of you. So the subject matter or the bird or wildlife may actually be quite small with respect to the overall landscape that you're capturing. So you get the full idea of the habitat or the environment that the wildlife is in, and you get to tell the story in that way. So there's these three perspectives that I'll be actually going back to throughout the presentation. So hopefully you'll remember these: detailed, middle ground, and environmental settings. Gear. So many people have asked me in the past what camera I use to capture all of my photos. So I started off with my D800, and then I moved on to the Z7, Z7 II, and now the Z9. But all this goes to show you that it's pretty much any camera that you have that you will be able to use to capture wildlife photography. So I don't want you to think that you need these high-end cameras. If you have, the 7500 or whatever, you'll still be able to capture these photos. In terms of lens consideration, well, a long focal length lens is basically relative to your purpose and needs. So what I mean by that is what it is that you're trying to capture with your wildlife photography. So I mentioned the 3 different perspectives in my earlier slide. If you're trying to capture that detail of the wildlife, then yes, maybe you'll need a longer focal length. But if you're capturing that wider perspective, as in perspective number 3, then perhaps you can actually do with a wide-angle lens or maybe even a 70-200 lens. So your lens requirements will all depend on what sort of picture that you're kind of getting after. For wildlife, it is important to not affect the animal's behavior when you're out shooting. So that's pretty much why we always use telephoto lenses. Is so that if you do want to capture the details of the wildlife and you want to capture them from an observer's perspective, so you're not affecting or stressing the wildlife out as you get closer to the animal. I wrote down on the bottom, 400 millimeters can be quite short to get any detailed close-ups. Well, this all depends on what kind of wildlife you're trying to capture. So if you're trying to capture something small like a bird, you might need a little bit more than 400 if you want to actually capture the details of the bird. So something like an 800 might actually be a little bit better. But in this photo that I have here, the bird is actually in its environment. I've captured a little bit more of its environment. So I would say this is probably something like a perspective 2 or 3, where you get to show the bird in its natural habitat. So this you can easily capture with a 70-200 or a 400 millimeter focal length. So in terms of the actual lenses that I use, these are the lenses that I've been using throughout my years. The 70-200, 200-500, the Z100-400, and attached to that is a 2x teleconverter to give me up to 800 millimeters. And also alternate lenses that I've actually used in the past were the Z24-120, which is a great all-around zoom lens to have. And as well, I've actually captured things with my ZMC 105 micro lens. So obviously in this particular case, you'll need to get closer to your subject matter to get any details. But this just goes to show you that you may not necessarily need, that strong super telephoto range of the 800 millimeters and beyond. So whatever lens you have at your disposal, by all means, feel free to use them and change things up by capturing those different perspectives that I mentioned beforehand. So going back to storytelling imagery, I wanted to start off this section with this particular image that I thought was actually well suited for it. It's sort of like a David and Goliath type of image where you have basically a snail that's being trapped in a spider's web. And I captured this with my Nikon Z7 and my 105 micro lens. So you can actually see this really details of the snail and the actual spider that's right beside the snail, and it's moving in to make its attack. The snail is pretty much helpless in that spider web, and I was able to capture the final details because the sun was actually shining behind it, giving it a nice backlit effect for this particular image. So I thought it was actually a great start for the storytelling section. This particular image is of a snapping turtle that I captured in a local park here in Toronto. And it is a snapping turtle with basically its neck perched up, looking up towards the sky. But if you look a little bit closer, you'll actually see that there's something right on top of the nose. And that's actually an ant that was crawling on the tip of his nose. The turtle wasn't attacking it or anything. It was actually just admiring the ant on top of the tip of the nose. And I actually captured this with, I believe it was my 200 to 500 millimeter lens. So at 500 millimeters, I was probably a fair distance away. I would say about 20 to 30 feet away from the turtle itself. So it's pictures like this that I actually like to capture, that it makes the viewer want to look a little bit deeper in the photo, question why it is that I took the photo, and maybe actually see that end surprise when they actually look deeper into the photo itself. So in this particular morning here, I captured this with my Z 100 to 400 millimeter. And I believe this was at around 400 millimeters. It was a couple of swans that I saw swimming. Swans. It was a couple of ducks that I saw swimming in Lake Ontario at sunrise. And they were enjoying their time together. But then all of a sudden, one of them said, "I've had enough of you." And they just started flapping its wings and actually started flying away. So at that instance, I had my camera focused already on them. So I was easily able to capture that defining moment where that duck was going to flap its wings and fly away. And with a faster shutter speed, I was able to capture the splash of the water itself. This next photo here, I really like this because of basically the expression that this female wood duck gave me. So I was tracking this wood duck who was swimming in a pond in a nearby park here in Toronto, and I had the Z 100 to 400, I believe, with a 2x teleconverter on here. So this may have been at an 800 millimeter or less focal length. But I was able to capture the expression. So basically, this female duck, wood duck, was swimming along, looking for food with the beak in the water. And at one instance, she actually looked up and her eyes stared right at my lens. And I was able to capture that one fleeting moment where she was still moving towards me, because you can see the breaking of the water over her beak. And you can then see the eyes, those glaring at me and the lens, as if to, tell me, what do you think I'm doing capturing her, trying to look for food at that moment or in time. So I really love that expression. And so that's really made that moment for me for this particular image. This one is a really interesting image in that I was actually out in the woodlands walking with the 100 to 400 and 2x teleconverter as well. I believe this was probably about the 500 millimeter range I was at. I saw the raccoon walking along the woodland area, so I started tracking it, and all of a sudden it paused in its tracks, and it actually looked right towards me. And by chance, it was actually right behind the stump of a tree. So I was only able to capture half of the raccoon, but she was there staring at me for the longest time. And I noticed that she had this really solemn expression on her. And then I wanted to capture that moment that I had with her. And it was later that I found out what had happened was her partner. I actually saw him somewhere out in not too far in the distance, but something had happened to him. So I'm pretty sure this raccoon was feeling the effects of that, and I was able to capture that fleeting moment in time. Again, these three buffleheads were playing out in Lake Ontario in the morning light, and I was able to capture this expressive moment where they were having fun together. These are all male buffleheads. This was in the springtime, so it was actually mating season. So perhaps these males on the right The two of them on the right were actually fighting towards each other for a female that they were after. I don't know, but there are so many different stories that we can derive from this, and I just love the fact that I was able to capture these expressive moments of the buffleheads. And all the while, while this one male bufflehead on the left-hand side was actually looking at everything from another observer's perspective as well. And this particular image, I really like this as well because it's just a unique moment in time. And everyone loves the red-winged blackbirds that we have here in the city parks. So one late winter morning, actually, I went out to a local park here, and I was actually walking along the pathway, and I looked to my right and found this red-winged blackbird actually walking along these tall reeds. And so I stopped in my tracks, and I kneeled down to my knees, and I got to the level of the red-winged blackbird, and I started tracking it. And at one point in time, it actually stopped. It put one of its feet up on the reeds itself there, and it actually looked down on the water, admiring its own reflection. So I actually chuckled at that when I saw that, and I was able to capture that moment. And soon after that, he just went along his own way. So tons of stories we can tell about this. I don't know what he was doing. Maybe he was checking himself out, seeing how handsome he was. Who knows what was happening at that moment, but I was happy to be able to capture this unique pose for this red-winged blackbird. It's not something that you would normally see too often, even if you were to look for a red-winged blackbird out in your local park. This particular image here is a very interesting one in that the subject is actually not too obvious. So I would say probably maybe perspective 2 or 3 for this as well, where I was actually quite far away from this. At first notice, you might think that it's just a picture of a tree with branches flowing a little bit to the left-hand side there. But if you look a little closer, following the branches from the right to the left, you'll actually see that there's a snowy owl perched right on the top of that tree there. And behind the snowy owl is actually something that's even more evident, is actually a blade of a wind turbine. So there is a wind turbine behind the snowy owl. So I actually waited for the turbine to come behind the snowy owl, and with my Z9 I actually captured this with the 20 frames per second mode, and I was able to capture that one moment where that wind turbine was actually right behind the snowy owl. So sort of I guess you could say it's a contrast between man-made elements and human and nature elements. What you want to make of that is basically up to you, but I was able to capture that moment where we intersect with nature and humankind. And don't forget, in winter season, when it's heavily snowing, wildlife do not always sleep in the winter at all times either. So it's important to be able to capture that and be able to realize that there's still things going out in our local parks. So if you go out during some heavy snowstorms, you'll be able to capture precious moments like this, where it's a male grebe that was actually collecting branches for its nest that it was actually creating. And there was actually a female grebe that was waiting along the nest area and helping the male grebe build the nest in this snowy storm that actually happened during an early spring season this past spring season actually. So it was a precious moment that I was able to capture, and again, with the faster shutter speed, I was able to capture these individual snowflakes falling down onto the lake. And I included this picture because sometimes when you go out on your walks, you don't always get the shot that you're envisioned. You go out on your walks and you're hoping to get that one awesome shot. Sometimes, I come out with my walks with no shot at all, or sometimes it's just a shot of these bottoms of the ducks that they decided to show me, and I was trying to capture their faces and their bodies, but they were constantly diving in deep into the water to find food. So this is the only thing that I was able to capture of these ducks. So I thought it was a funny moment in time. So I decided to include that in this particular storytelling case as well. So benefits of a high megapixel camera. So I mentioned before the cameras that I've been using, they are all of the higher megapixel range. The Nikon Z9 is a 45.7 megapixel camera. Not to say that you need all these high-end megapixel cameras to use these, to capture these images, but I just wanted to show you a little bit of a benefit that you can do, you can get from these cameras. So I wrote on the bottom there, a tight crop can bring you that much closer to the subject while still retaining that image quality. So going back to this wood duck that I captured, this is actually the full frame of the image that I showed you beforehand. So at 8256 pixels wide and 5504 pixels high, this is the full resolution. But when I showed you the image before, there was actually a small crop of this, but that crop was still at 2800 pixels by 1872 pixels high. So you can see still that I'm still keeping that high resolution image to be able to bring in that clear, crisp view of the wood duck, even when I zoom in. So this was the resulting image from that cropped, from the original image that came out of the camera. Similarly with the red-winged blackbird that I captured, this was the full image at 8256 pixels by 5504 pixels high. So this in itself is still a great image. I would say this is a perspective 2, where you have some of the environments showing as well as the subject in the middle there. But for the purpose of the presentation and storytelling, I wanted to crop in a little bit more so we get more of the focal attention to the red-winged blackbird. So I cropped it in a little bit tighter, and I still retained that image quality because even though I cropped it, it was still at 4400 by 2975 pixels high. So this is the retaining, the resulting image, even though the it was a little bit of a crop from the original image that came out from the camera. So creative compositions, this section is basically all about doing something different and being able to open up your creativity, open up your creative juices in terms of trying to frame your wildlife in any way possible. So in this particular case here, you can see that it's actually the feet and some feathers of a, this will be a heron, a great blue heron that I saw in the local park. I was so fortunate actually that this great blue heron came swimming or walking in the water towards me within literally feet away from me. That I was when I was using the 200 to 500 millimeter lens, it actually came too close that I couldn't even focus on it because it was too close. So what I did was I actually tilted my camera down a little, waited a little bit for the heron to move away, and I actually captured the reflection of the heron on the water and the feather that was actually floating on top of the surface of the water and the bubble that was there. So I actually thought that was actually really interesting as a focal element with a little bit of a blur of the actual heron in the backdrop. And it's accompanied by the contrasting colors of the yellow reflection of the trees and the leaves on the water with the contrast of the blue feathers of the great blue heron. So in this particular case here, this is a bald eagle flying in the bright blue sky there. I captured this with a fast shutter speed, so I was able to capture the crisp detail of the eagle. The eagle is actually on the left-hand side of this frame, which is not something that I like. And I actually clipped the wings of the frame, wings of the eagle as well, which is not something that I liked as well. So instead of throwing away this image and saying that it's no good, I decided to think of another way to show this image. And what I actually posted on my Instagram is a crop like this. So I actually cropped in super tight to the eagle. So it's pretty much a detailed perspective of the eagle. I rotated the crop just so slightly so that the wings were actually covering the entire frame of the right-hand side of the frame so that we can get the pure detail of the eagle's eyes and the feathers, and now you can actually appreciate the textures of the feathers of the eagle and the really glare of the stare of the bald eagle. And now you don't actually know that the eagle is actually on the left hand side of my frame, or that I clipped the top wings of the eagle, because I actually decided to intentionally crop in a lot tighter than what I had originally captured. So for those images that you may have thought that were throwaways in the past, you might want to revisit them and see if you can actually do some creative compositions with them. And maybe you'll be surprised at how many new images that you'll actually be able to introduce from your archives. And this particular image, what is it that I'm taking a photo of? Well, it's actually a little bit hard to tell because it's a bunch of blurred leaves and bushes and whatnot. But if you actually look closer on the top left, you'll see that there's actually two northern shovelers. There's a couple of northern shovelers right hidden in the top left there, that's actually showing right in the gap opening between two logs. And this may not be quite evident, but this does make you look a little closer to the image, and it actually makes you think, well, what am I trying to capture? What did I capture at this moment? So what I did was, there's a bunch of bushes. I intentionally moved a little bit to my right and shot right through the bushes through an opening that I saw inside a log, and I actually captured the northern shovelers. So you can see this is the overall scene that I was confronted with. You can see the log that has a triangle formation on the left there. Right behind the log, that's the log right there. And right behind it, you can actually see the two northern shovelers that I actually captured. And on the right bottom side, you can see the brushes that I was actually shooting right through to get that blurry effect in the foreground, and I was able to capture that moment. So again, a very different perspective, a very different composition that may not work for everyone, but I thought it was a creative moment, and I was actually able to capture the northern shovelers in a different perspective. So in this particular case, it's a bunch of branches on the left-hand side and a nice puffy white cloud on the right-hand side. But if you look a little bit closer, you'll actually see that there's actually a songbird sitting on the branch on the left-hand side, and it's actually singing a song. So it's actually, the beaks are wide open and is staring up in the sky there. And I wanted to capture that brief moment in time. And you can see that it's a really nice, sunny, bright day through the bright blue sky there, and I love the interest that the fluffy cloud brings on the right-hand side there. So again, a little bit of a different composition here, where I included most of the habitat that the bird was in, and I was able to capture the details of the trees and the branches, as well as the detail of the bird itself. Here is a western wren. So if anybody knows what a western wren is, winter wren, sorry, a winter wren, they are basically these small little birds, very small actually, and they just skirt away so fast that it's actually really difficult for you to track them. And they actually love to actually hide in these brushes and the fallen trees and the branches and the leaves. They go in and out of all these crevices and the rocks that you see in the bottom there. So it was actually really hard to try and capture this, but I was tracking it all throughout his habitat, and I was as he stopped on the branch for a split second, I was able to capture this wren within his overall habitat. So this would be maybe a perspective two, I would say, because you don't get too much of the details, but you do get a detail of the habitat itself, which is the fallen leaves and branches. And you can sort of get a perspective or an idea of how small this wren is by looking at the leaf that it's standing in front of. That leaf is actually just a leaf from a tree that's fallen on the ground. So you can actually see that the wren is actually a lot smaller than that leaf. So these birds are really small, and I was super glad that I was able to capture them in a still moment like this. So here's another picture of trees, and that's actually one of my favorite pictures that I actually came out with for my trip to Kingston. So this was outside of a park just outside of the city of Kingston, Ontario. And this is just a bunch of branches actually flowing from the right to the left. But again, if you follow the branches from the right to the left, right at the top, the tip there, you actually see the snowy owl that's perched right at the top. And you have this overall pink, beautiful pink hue that's actually happening from the sun setting in the over to the right. And it just makes you want to see, okay, what is it that I'm actually looking at? It's just these branches, but I also see a little bit of the buds of the branches as well. And if you're looking a little bit closer, you now actually see that there is a snowy owl perch right on the top there, resting and just doing its own business there. So I actually really like this picture because it does make you want to look further into it. Gives the viewer a second turn as to why it is that I took this picture. So here is some sliding turtles. I think they're called red ear sliding turtles, and this was basically caught similarly at a very small opening of a log that I found in a branch in a log. And I'm going to pause here because I got to blow my nose. So hold on one sec. Okay. So with this particular photo here, I think these are sliding turtles, red ear sliding turtles. And I actually did something similar here where I found a really small opening on a log in a nearby park, and I actually positioned myself so that I can see those sliding turtles right through that small opening. And I made sure that the overall composition was of the actual blurred log, and then the turtles that you can see that are in focus are just a small portion on the image itself. But again, this makes you want to look, okay, what is it that I'm actually trying to capture here? So again, this was the overall shot that I was confronted with. You can see on the bottom right there that I have a small opening in that log there, and that small opening is where I actually walked towards and pointed my camera right through there. And you probably won't be able to see it, but the sliding turtles are right where my arrow is on the left, and that hole on the right is where I was actually shooting towards. So again, when you're walking and you're confronted with something, try a little different composition like this. If you see a small hole or something, maybe try and move towards that perspective to see if you can capture the wildlife in that small hole. So something a little bit different than, a straight on shot of the wildlife. This one, again, this was taken just outside of Kingston when I was taking pictures of snowy owls. A little bit different here. It was just basically a post here with a snowy owl on the right-hand side that's very calm and just chilling in its surroundings. But I composed this so that the only thing that was there was the snowy owl and the post. And I felt this was actually very doable because there was so much texture in the openness, in the negative space that you have all around the snowy owl there, that we had a little bit of the clouds, and the sun was actually setting at this moment. So you can see some of the colors starting to appear in the clouds itself as well. So I felt that the texture in the clouds gave it enough interest in the negative space that I was able to compose this with the snowy owl being so small in the frame. So again, this was probably taken with, I'm going to say probably about 100 millimeter range, where I included just the owl and the entire landscape. So this was what you would see a perspective 3 in this case, where you have the subject really small in the frame and the environment that's taking up most of the image itself. So something a little bit different here is a picture of I believe this is a female bufflehead. I saw that I was tracking it in going through the water there, and I noticed actually that a swan was actually swimming right in front of it, and that the two were actually coming really close into my shooting range. So as I was tracking the bufflehead, um, the swan actually, the two were so aligned that I actually captured the bufflehead, and I framed it so that the neck of the swan and the back of the swan was actually framing the bufflehead head itself there. So it's another unique perspective that you don't see too often. When you first look at this, you'll be like, oh, what's that white thing in the front there? I see a nice little duck swimming in the back, but I don't know what that thing in the white in the foreground is. So again, that's a swan that's swimming in the foreground that I intentionally used as a framing element to put focus more on the duck in the back. This particular image, I thought it was actually pretty fun. It was a fun image of the grackles, the common grackles that we see in our parks here. These are just branch grackles that happen to be landed on a branch of a tree. There were 3 of them there, but each one is actually doing something quite different. So I thought it was a nice storytelling image as well. A little bit different. The one on the left is calling, is making its noise. The one in the middle is actually looking up as if to look at something that it's seeing up in the sky there. And the one on the right is actually looking straight towards itself as if it's eyeing something as well in there in the far distance. So again, 3 grackles doing something completely different, looking in different directions. I thought it was a fun image to show in this particular case here. Another duck here that was swimming from right to left. I noticed that it was actually leaving a trail of ripples behind as it was swimming from right to left. So what I actually did was I intentionally framed the duck, the merganser, I believe, to the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side was the trail of ripples that I felt would be used as a leading line element from right all the way to the left. So I felt that this composition worked well in this particular case here. So normally what we like to do when we photograph something moving is place a little bit more space in the direction that the subject is moving in. But in this particular case, I did the complete opposite, and I felt that it worked because of the ripples that we saw behind it. A coyote I basically found walking along in one of our parks, but it's not a overview of the coyote itself. I decided to focus specifically on the head of the coyote and on the profile side of the coyote, because I actually saw it. It was walking, and it was going to walk behind this tree, or in front of this tree. So I, as it was walking in front of it, I managed to put focus on the eye, and the head of the coyote was right behind this tree. That I felt that I was able to capture the stern glare of the coyote as it was looking towards in front of it. It was eyeing something. I don't know what it was, but in this particular case, I was actually quite far away from it. I was using 100 to 400, I believe, with a 2x teleconverter on it. So I may have been somewhere about the 500 to 800 range in this particular case. So I was quite a fair distance away from the coyote, which you do want to be, because obviously for the safety of yourself, and you don't want to affect the behavior of the coyote as well. So again, profile, a little bit of a different perspective, so you can appreciate the details of the fur and the stare and the glare of the coyote here. This particular image of a female Baltimore Oriole I felt was actually pretty interesting, because I composed it on the very far left bottom corner. And I did that because I felt the symmetry of the branches and the tree that I was actually on lend itself well for this particular case, because you have that dividing line of the tree in the middle there, and you also have the 2 branches that are extending from the middle of the branch there. So and it just so happened that the Baltimore Oriole was facing to the right-hand side. So I felt that positioning it on the very bottom left was actually very doable in this particular case. and in terms of a composition for, I would say probably perspective number 2 or 3, where you have that bird really small in the frame, and you have the overall habitat encompassing most of the frame itself here. So the background is all blurred, so the attention is all on towards the branch and the leaves and the Baltimore Oriole that is perched on the branch itself. So I felt this was actually a pretty unique composition, unique perspective, and a different one for a bird, because normally when we see birds, we actually want to focus on the details of the bird. But I'm trying to focus here on the overall habitat of the bird itself that the bird is in. Silhouette. So this is another type of, I guess, effect that you can achieve when you don't want to capture the details of the birds itself, but you want to appreciate the birds where they are, and maybe the environment it's in or the timing that you capture the bird. So in this particular case, it was a sunset. The background was so bright, it was backlighting, that it actually made the sandhill crane here fall into the shadow. So the sandhill crane, there was no way of me being able to capture the details of the sandhill crane, so I just let it fall into the shadow and expose more towards the brighter part of the image, which was the background. Then I was able to actually appreciate the intricate details of the feathers of the sandhill crane as it was actually flying from the left to the right here. And this was actually taken away outside of Toronto area. It was, I believe, just outside of Long Point, which is which is about an hour and a half, 2 hours away from Toronto. So it's another local park area that I visited because I knew the sandhill cranes were actually there for that winter season. So it was a beautiful moment that I was able to capture, and I was able to capture that nicely. So in this particular case here, we have some more waterfowl having its fun, doing its thing in the early morning glow of the sunlight on Lake Ontario. Again, I'm focusing the exposure on the water because I really love that orange glow of the sunrise as it was reflecting off the water. And there is something going on here, obviously, with these ducks. And you can see on the right hand side that the couple there is doing something, appreciating the company of each other, while the left hand side, well, it's actually doing a mating dance, and it was trying to court one of the other ducks. So this was during mating season, so it was actually very active in that respect. But obviously, the two on the right were having no interest in whatever the duck on the left was doing. So I thought it was actually a fun image to show in this particular case, even though it was all silhouetted and you don't see the details on the feathers or anything on these waterfowl. So in this particular case, this was taken in Toronto, but now I've included a man-made element here, the CN Tower. But this is just to basically showcase the plethora of birds, in this case, the gulls that were flying so much around the city center area. And you can actually see a lot of the shadows of not the shadows, but you can actually see the gulls in different sizes, because the gulls were actually relative to where I'm standing. A lot were closer to me, while some were further back than me. So you can see near the CN Tower that they were actually further away from me, but the ones that were actually closer, you can see that they were actually larger. And obviously, with the backlighting of the sunrise, there's no way of me being able to capture the details. So I just decided to put everything into shadow area so that you can actually see the silhouette of the birds as well as the actual man-made CN Tower there, just to give it a little bit of a contrast between nature and man-made elements here. Finally, we have, again, one of my favorite images here, taken at sunrise during a local park here in the city, where the songbirds were actually quite active because it was in the early spring season. That this was just a song sparrow, and it decided to fly in these really thick branched area. And I noticed that actually the sun was actually rising behind it. So I actually positioned it so that you can see the sun behind the branches, and I moved a fair bit away so that I can see the actual bird. And I actually did try my best to actually center the bird to the actual sun. And because it was backlit by the sun, I have no details of the feather of the bird, but I'm happy that I was able to capture the overall shape of the bird, and you can see that the song sparrow is actually pointing its beak up, and the beaks are actually open because it was singing its song, and that's exactly the precise moment that I wanted to capture, with the beautiful glow of the orange sun in the back. It kind of looks like an eyeball if you look at the overall picture like you do here. So this would be, I guess, a perspective number 2 or 3 as well, because you're actually capturing the thick branches along with the tree itself. So that's pretty much it for my urban wildlife photography and my perspective on it. So I hope you enjoyed some of these rather unique and different perspectives. I hope you thought they were a little bit different than what you may normally see for wildlife photography. They are basically meant to be able to give you that inspiration to be able to capture the wildlife that we have in our natural environment in our city with your existing gear that you have. So you may be surprised at all the things that you'll be able to capture if you think outside the box, if you think a little bit creatively in your compositions. And again, in this particular case here is a wood duck, a male wood duck. I did actually capture the wood duck in its entirety, but in this particular case, I actually composed it so that half of it was missing, so that the rest of the wood duck is left to our own imagination. And I actually like it so that, we have a lot of the space on the right-hand side where you can see the ripples on the water. And it basically lent itself well to this page because it'll let me actually write the writing on the right-hand side and still keep the details of the wood duck on the left-hand side. So again, thank you so much for joining me today. My website and my contact information is there. You can always reach me on Instagram or direct message or email through my website. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I will see you again next time. Thank you.